Universal Casualty, Super Q,
los Miami Dolphins y tú rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Son los Dolphins, nuestros Miami Dolphins, el team número 1 en toda la nación. Y son ellos orgullo de Miami y de todos los latinos en la capital del sol. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Este año no me hablen de los Redskins, no me hablen de los Chargers, ni de los Dallas Cowboys, porque los Dolphins son número 1 y lo demostrarán al llegar al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Nuestra línea está mejor que nunca y nuestra defensiva fue siempre la mejor. Y es por eso que yo no tengo duda que los Miami Dolphins ganarán el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl.
Universal Casualty
Y Super Q, los primeros. Bueno, caballeros, todo el mundo que cante con nosotros. Dame una D, dame una O, dame una L, dame una P, una H, una I, una N, una S, que es lo que tenemos. Miami Dolphins. Me voy para el Super Bowl. 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 Me voy para el Super Bowl.
You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network.
There's a team Dolphin fans, and welcome to the Same Old Dolphin Show, part of the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. I'm Josh Katzker. With me today and every day is my brother from the exact same mother, Aaron the Brain. Aaron, say hello to the people.
Hello to the people.
We are back, baby. Whew. I'm excited. I got the new theme song. We got the new hold music as we're counting down. Rumba to Super Bowl. We got rooting for the Dolphins. Shout out to Miami Dolphins Vinyl on SoundCloud for those sick tunes. Shout out to Efren Ramos for the new graphics, the new intro video. He also setting us up with a new logo. Everything hasn't quite changed over yet. It's still preseason after all, but we're still working our way, and things are changing over. We're getting fired up because the 2022 Miami Dolphins season is nearly upon us, Brain. But what have you been up to in the last couple months? I mean, I showed up a couple times in the offseason, said hello on Dolphins Talk, which shout out, by the way, to everybody listening to DolphinsTalk.com, watching on the DolphinsTalk.com, or I'm sorry, the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. Been a minute since we've done one of these. Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed to the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel, you better. So head on over there, subscribe. You can watch live. Hit us up in the comments. It's good to see everybody. Brain, what you been up to?
Well, I mean, I got my sports fix in, throughout the spring and early part of the summer with the Miami Heat making their deep run, coming basically a shot away from the NBA Finals. So that was exciting. And then that ended, and like a lot of fans here in South Florida, I used to be a baseball fan, but the Marlins just kind of killed it for me. So I really haven't been watching baseball at all. So I've had to go to other avenues to get my competition fix. And I realize that I'm extremely late to the party, but the best competition reality show on television, RuPaul's Drag Race.
I can't wait for the spinoff of the Same Old Dolphin Show, which is going to be the same old RuPaul's Drag Race show, where you and Mrs. The Brain will review episodes of RuPaul's Drag Race. We got to get that set.
Oh my God. Yes. Yes, Queen.
Is there a niche audience, like crossover hardcore Miami Dolphin fans that would also be super into RuPaul's Drag Race enough to hear your commentary on it? And you know what? Maybe we could finally get your wife on the show.
Yeah, maybe that's doubtful. I will say this though. So anybody that's listened to the show for a year or two knows that my other guilty pleasure, aside from now RuPaul's Drag Race, is I'm a big fan of the Real Housewives. My wife has gotten me really into that. And
of any and all cities.
Almost all of them. My favorites are Salt Lake City and Potomac. New Jersey is good. Beverly Hills is annoying but good in its own way. And the new one, Dubai, has potential. And so what I started doing, and I've kind of joked about potentially turning this into a podcast, is each season, really each episode in each franchise, I start to develop a power ranking of the housewives from each franchise.
Oh my.
And so she really gets a kick out of that, and we'll be watching it, and she'll see that like my wheels are turning, and it'll go to a commercial, and she'll look at me, and I'll say, "I've got a power ranking coming."
Oh, fantastic! Well, we'll look forward to that episode, the spinoff of this show, the Same Old Housewives show with Aaron the Brain and Mrs. Brain. Looking forward to that. That's going to be great. Mrs. Brain is in the comments. Mrs. Brain is in the comments. See, this is why you got to watch live, because you can get a chance to interact with Mrs. Brain on YouTube. It's very exciting. But listen, we're not going to talk about RuPaul's Drag Race and the Real Housewives of Southern Broward County. We're not going to talk about that right now, because we got bigger fish to fry, because training camp is upon us. The doldrums are over. The dark, those dog days of summer where there's nothing going on, we've passed it. Training camp is coming up. And so what this episode is going to be all about is talking about some of the biggest questions that we have that are going to be answered, hopefully, in training camp. So this is, I think, different then asking some of the questions that we are looking to have answered in the regular season. So this is not going to be an episode where we're going to talk a lot about the quarterback because, listen, the quarterback situation is what it is. We're going to talk about that when we get to the regular season. And I see some other people here in the comments, and there is some concern about Tua. And listen, we're going to have plenty of time to talk about Tua over the course of the season. That's not what today's episode is about. We're going to ask those questions as we get into getting ready for the season. Well, we'll start to look at those things a little bit more deeply, but I really want to talk about where things are at in terms of heading into training camp and what are the questions that we're going to get answers to in, these 4 or 5 weeks leading up into the season, the month of August, because we're going to start to get some answers here pretty soon, but it maybe not to the big questions. These are some smaller questions. So that's what we're going to kind of get into today. And then we're going to close off with our new segment, the Dolphins Talk Pulse Check at the end of the episode, giving you an update, let you know how the brain and I are feeling about this Miami Dolphins team in this moment. But before we do that, a reminder to everybody, make sure you are following us on Twitter. I am at Amplified to Rock. He is at Aaron the Brain. That's Aaron the Brain. The show is at Same Old Dolphins. Of course, every episode of the show is available at dolphinstalk.com. So make sure you're visiting dolphinstalk.com each and every day for all of the latest news on the Miami Dolphins. And of course, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, anywhere you get your podcasts. You can find the Same Old Dolphin Show. And we appreciate you subscribing and following along, having a great time. And of course, hey, we're sponsored by Manscaped. Go to manscaped.com, enter the promo code DolphinsTalk. You're going to save 20% off of your order. You're going to get free shipping, and you're going to get some really great products to take care of yourself when it comes to the grooming situation. So, hey, can't go wrong with that. Manscaped.com, promo code DolphinsTalk, all one word. So, Brain, we've spent plenty of time, getting in deep into the weeds, getting ready for your fantasy football draft and all of that stuff. But now it's really time to dig into training camp. And I think honestly, the biggest question, and you can, maybe you disagree, but for me, I think the biggest question that we have going into training camp is this offensive line and figuring out what that format is going to be and who's going to play where. Do we have a right tackle on the team? Do we need to go out and get a right tackle? Is Austin Jackson going to be this guy? Is the addition of Teron Armstead and Connor Williams going to be enough to solidify what was a pretty poor offensive line and make them into a stronger unit as we go through the season? Now, a lot of those questions are not going to be answered until we get into the regular season, but in terms of the Dolphins finding that starting five, that is hopefully something that we can figure out in training camp. And it is my hope, as well as I'm sure the hope of everybody listening to this and everybody who is a fan of the Miami Dolphins anywhere, the hope is that the Miami Dolphins have a right tackle on their roster right now, and that we're not going to have to go out and do some additional shopping. So, Brain, what are your thoughts on this offensive line as we head into camp here?
Well, first of all, they are going to answer the question. They are going to have a starting five on their offensive line. Whether or not it's any good, whether or not it's effective, that remains to be seen. Obviously, left tackle, you know what you're doing there. You got Teron Armstead. You're hoping that he stays healthy, because if he doesn't stay healthy, then it kind of throws everything else back into disarray. So you're really banking a lot on Teron Armstead really being a stabilizing force by putting him at left tackle. Now, this Connor Williams thing, this is so Dolphins. I mean, this is so this team that you get a guy, you bring in a guy that has been a very good left guard for years, and you think, okay, great, we fixed the left side of the offensive line. The other stuff, the other positions, we maybe have some guys that could step in. And now what are we doing? We're playing the guy at a new position, and this immediately sets alarms off. Now, I'm not saying that it's not going to work. Like, they obviously had this in mind when they targeted Connor Williams, and the fact that, like, they were playing him and teaching him a new position in mini camp kind of tells you that this was the plan all along. The problem is, we don't know at all. And anybody that tells you that they know that this guy's going to be a really good center, they're lying to you, because you don't know that until he actually goes out there and plays center in regular season football games. So the fact that we're dedicating our, mini camp and our training camp to him now playing the center position, it all of a sudden opens up a hole at left guard where we've got question marks now. And we don't know if Connor Williams is going to be a good center. Now, granted, if he turns out to not be a good center, you can always move him back to left guard, and that's that. But now you've basically shown that you have no confidence in Michael Dieter. But you didn't go out and you got another center. So you've created more holes seemingly needlessly. So the hope is that Connor Williams becomes the franchise center and really locks down that role and plays it at an elite level. Because then you've got, between Connor Williams at center and Teron Armstead at left tackle, you could plug somebody in there playing next to two players that good and kind of hide them there. And that's kind of what they're hoping to do with Liam Eichenberg. I don't know that necessarily that's going to work or not. I think people are sleeping on Michael Dieter. I think Michael Dieter is in a place where he's in a contract year and he's going to be as motivated as ever to try to find his way back onto the starting five of this offensive line, whether that's at center, whether that's at guard. But I think Michael Dieter's got a real chance of still becoming a starting player on this offensive line, whether it's at one of those two positions. Obviously at right guard, that you've got Robert Hunt, and he's been fine. He's been solid. You're hoping that Robert Hunt could kind of make a jump, because he's been fine. He's been solid. He's been the least of their concerns on the offensive line, but it's not like he's been a Pro Bowler either. And then the big question mark is right tackle, where obviously the first crack at it is going to be Austin Jackson. We're hoping with a completely different scheme, with a new coaching staff, with another year of experience, that this works out for him. I am actually pretty optimistic about it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Austin Jackson is definitely going to break out and is going to be really good. But what I'm going to say is that a guy who is a much better run blocker as a tackle than he is a pass protector, who is now going to be in a system where he's going to be being able to play downfield a lot more. We're presumably going to be running the football a lot more. And we've got a better coaching staff. He's got every opportunity. The fact is that this is make or break time for Austin Jackson.
Oh, that's 100%.
If he can't do it this year with this kind of staff, with the talent that they have around him, with the confidence that they are showing in, then it won't work. And if it doesn't work for Austin Jackson, then you're talking about, well, maybe Liam Eichenberg moves over and plays right tackle. Maybe it's Greg Little. Maybe it's one of these other guys like a Larnell Coleman. And frankly, that's a recipe for disaster.
Buddy, listen, Liam Eichenberg's already got his hands full moving into left guard. Like, that's already his own. That's another thing. That's another one of the big question marks here. So, we're looking at a situation where right now on the Miami Dolphins offensive line, you're looking at one sure thing at left tackle, right? With Teron Armstead. And you're feeling pretty good about Robert Hunt at right guard. And then you got three question marks on the offensive line. And that's why you've really got to hope that things gel and come together in a positive way in training camp. And I think we're going to be looking at that during training camp, and we're going to hear reports from camp, and we're going to hear that either things are going really well or they're not. I think one of the good things is that this Miami Dolphins offensive line is going to be going up against the Miami Dolphins defense that is pretty stout, with a lot of players that have come into their own. And so we're going to hear, hopefully, that the offense is a little bit holding their own as we come through camp this year. And hopefully, that is an indication that things are starting to come together on that offensive line. And then obviously once we start real football, then we're going to get those answers for sure. Let's go to another area where there's questions. And I think it's one of the more interesting areas of this team is the offensive backfield, the running back situation. Now, the Dolphins made a lot of upgrades in the running back room this offseason. They brought in Chase Edmonds. They brought in Raheem Mostert. They brought in Sony Michel. They drafted Zaquandre White. They also still have Myles Gaskin. They also still have Savon Ahmed. They also still have Jared Dokes. Who else? Who else they got kicking around back there? They got these with Patrick Laird still kicking around back there. What do we got going on?
No Patrick Laird. They got
and those are the big guys, right? I don't know.
I mean, you mentioned Raheem Mostert, right?
Right. We mentioned Mostert. We mentioned White, the guy they drafted. It's like they've got a lot of people back there. And now when you listen to a lot of the prognosticating around the Miami Dolphins, the biggest thing that you're hearing is that, it's very clear that the three running backs are going to be, it's going to be Chase Edmonds leading the way, followed by Raheem Mostert, and followed by Sony Michel. And then there's one other guy that's going to make the cut. And maybe that might be the easiest, most obvious solution. But I don't know that that's necessarily correct, because Raheem Mostert is coming off of a pretty significant injury. So we don't know what shape he's going to be in. There's a possibility he could start training camp on the PUP list. So he may not be a shoo-in. And then, Sony Michel, he's just kind of out there, and he looked okay. He seems to be the guy who, if there's going to be somebody on the roster that's going to move into the Jordan 1-yard role, it's going to be Sony Michel moving into that role. So you've still got Myles Gaskin with an opportunity to make a living in the backfield for the Miami Dolphins. You also still have Savon Ahmed. And, the buzz in the rookie minicamp in the offseason was that Zaquandre White was looking pretty good. So I think, and not to mention that we know that Jared Dokes is a has pass blocking to his, on his resume. I don't know that Jared Dokes, a guy who was drafted by the previous regime, is going to necessarily be a good fit in this system, but he's there, and he's part of the conversation, and we're gonna watch throughout this training camp. But how are you feeling about this running back room, Brain?
Well, I think they upgraded and they've got good quality depth. I mean, the fact that we're coming into this and we know that Myles Gaskin is battling just to make the roster should tell you everything you need to know, because Myles Gaskin was this team's number one running back the last 2 years. And frankly, I don't know that Myles Gaskin makes this roster. And I think he could be a guy that ultimately gets traded, because I think he's got some value there as a guy that has shown that he can be productive. Maybe he's not he's not a bell cow back, but he's certainly an NFL running back, a guy that can be productive in a committee. But I don't know that he is. I doubt highly that he's part of the long-term future here with the Dolphins. And I think the expectation is, just based on the fact that the Dolphins went out and signed 3 guys to be ahead of him in Mostert, Edmonds, and Michel. I think the expectation is that he's battling for the 4th running back spot on this roster as far as tailback. And I know somebody in the comments said, "Oh, you forgot about fullback." No, we didn't forget about fullback. Alec Ingold is obviously making the roster, but speaking specifically about the tailback or halfback position, they're probably going to keep 4. They might keep 5, but I think they're probably going to keep 4, because they're also keeping a fullback. So I think when you look at the fact that, if you keep Myles Gaskin at the end of the year, he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. So you're not going to re-sign him to a big contract. What's the difference really between Gaskin, Savon Ahmed, and Zaquandre White? I would say the difference is that those other guys probably have a higher upside. That they're more dynamic as far as they can break big plays. Now, maybe they aren't as reliable as a Myles Gaskin, which ultimately might end up getting him a spot on this roster. But I think if everybody is healthy in this backfield, I think Myles Gaskin is definitely, I think he's an odd man out. And I think he probably gets beat out by either of White or Ahmed. I don't think Dokes is, save for, multiple injuries in front of him, I don't think Dokes is making the roster. I think he's potentially a guy that could get stashed on the practice squad for a second year. But I don't think you're going to get that with Myles Gaskin. I don't think you're going to get that with Ahmed. Maybe you can get that with White, But with all the buzz about him, we'll see what happens in training camp and preseason, because he seems like the kind of guy that could flash. And if he doesn't get a roster spot on the Dolphins, he could get a roster spot with somebody else. But I don't think it would make sense to let a guy like that go, who you've got significantly more roster, control over as far as contractually, for one season of Myles Gaskin as your number 4 running back.
Yeah, and also don't forget Mike McDaniel and his regime out with that crew in San Francisco. They're the ones who originally brought Savon Ahmed in, before releasing him and sending him to Miami. So there is definitely interest there already. So there is a very real possibility that Gaskin could be the odd man out, but there's also a possibility that he could rise to the challenge and really turn up. So let's stick on the offensive side of the ball, because I think there's more interest on the offensive side of the ball as well. And quite frankly, I think there are fewer questions on the defensive side. So on the offensive side, another place where things are really interesting and another place where there are big questions is wide receiver. And I don't mean the top of the wide receiver chart, because I think obviously with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, you've got among the best 1-2 punches of wide receivers in the league, quite frankly. And then behind them, they've got Cedric Wilson, who they've brought in. And then behind him, this is where things really start to get interesting. And when you look at all of the different wide receiver options available for this Miami Dolphins team, you've got Lynn Bowden, you've got Trent Sherfield, you've got Preston Williams, you've got Devontae Dedmon, you've got River Craycraft, Braylon Sanders, Eric Izukana, Cody Core. You've got all of these wide receivers. And quite frankly, let's celebrate the fact that Devontae Parker is not on that list anymore. Nothing personal against Devontae Parker, but he's New England's problem now. But, he's gone. And now you've got, you got a Dolphins team that's probably going to have, 6 receivers on the roster, you think, when all is said and done? And so
probably 6, maybe 5, but probably 6.
So for sure, you've got Hill, Wilson, and Waddle, right? So that leaves you with 2 or 3 spots for Lynn Bowden Jr., Trent Sherfield, who played with San Francisco before coming to the Dolphins. You've got Preston Williams, who has a reputation as being able to play the game and being a jump ball catcher, but also, has problems staying healthy. You've got Devontae Dedmon. You've got River Craycraft. You've got Braylon Sanders. You've got the new draft pick, Eric Azukama. And then you've got Cody Core, who the Dolphins just brought in. He's been a practice squad guy. So you've got these guys at the bottom of the list. The question is, which 2 or 3 of those guys are going to make it? I could sit here and make an argument for Lynn Bowden Jr. because he's got some other skills. He's a little bit of a gimmick guy. I could make an argument for Preston Williams, but I could also make an argument that Eric Azukama should make it ahead of Preston Williams because they're similar players. Azukama is the rookie, right? And Preston Williams has had problems staying healthy in the past. So what do you do on the bottom end of that roster? And don't forget Sherfield, who's a guy that could also be very helpful in the special teams area. So he's the guy that could easily sort of slide into the sort of Mac Hollins role that has since been vacated. So what are your thoughts about how things shake out then at the bottom of this wide receiver depth chart?
Well, I mean, Azukama's got to make the roster, you would think. He was a 4th round pick. You're not just jettisoning 4th round picks unless they just completely bomb out and make a terrible name for themselves in the first week of training camp. So I mean, you got to figure he's making the roster. Now, whether or not he's the 4th receiver, I don't know, but I think he's the 4th roster spot that you can pretty much shore up. So now you're really talking about 1 or 2 spots. I know that, I think everybody is hoping that Lynn Bowden Jr. can pop in this preseason and that there's a role for him. But until we really see it, it's really just hope. Preston Williams, more than anybody else on this list, has shown that he can be a productive player. So I think that there's potential there. The Dolphins saw enough in Preston Williams that they decided to sign him to a 1-year contract to bring him back. So I think that Preston Williams has a legit shot. I think those are the 3 guys that probably have the inside track, but they're not. Well, Ezukanma is there. I would say, so you assume Ezukanma gets a 4th spot, so you got 2 spots left. Lynn Bowden Jr. and Preston Williams probably have the inside track, but their spot is not by any means guaranteed. So I think Trent Sherfield certainly has an opportunity to overtake one of those 2 guys. And then, these other guys, I don't know a lot about them. I don't think any of us really know a lot about them, but we're going to see if they can make a name for themselves in training camp, because you see it all the time where there are guys that come out of nowhere and make a name for themselves in training camp and in the preseason. If there's an injury or a player just does not perform up to the expectation, they can fall out of that. So I would say Lynn Bowden Jr. and Preston Williams, if I was guessing today, that would be your, the other 2 guys that make this receiving core on the active roster. But I would not be surprised if either of those 2 guys got beat out, if not both of them.
Well, I mean, and Preston Williams was that guy, when he showed up, he was the UDFA who showed up and balled out and made the team. Granted, that was in the days where the Dolphins didn't really have. That was when Jakeem Grant was one of the starting wide receivers for your football team.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Mean, it was like a lifetime ago when we had Jakeem Grant starting at wide receiver. But who is going to be this Kirk? Who is going to be the Kirk Merritt this year? Who's going to be the wide receiver that people get excited about? And that actually kind of leads me to my next question in general, is who are going to be those guys that are going to show up and be the surprise addition to the 53-man roster? Is this a year that a guy like Trill Williams can build on what he had last year and make this roster, especially when you've got guys, on this roster who are getting to the end of their current deal, who are maybe starting to regress a little bit. When you got a guy like Eric Rowe, who is maybe not quite the player that he was, he's maybe starting to slow down a little bit. Maybe there's an opportunity. Trill Williams can show up. Maybe there are some of these other guys on the team. Who are these other guys on the roster? Maybe this is the year that River Craycraft just appears and, makes big things happen. Who are those guys? Brain, do you have your eyes on a couple of players that you think, you think might be, let's say, dark horses to make this 53-man roster?
Well, I think on the offensive side of the ball, we already mentioned one, and that's Laquandre White. He's got a real chance to make the active roster as a running back, and with the health of Raheem Mostert, always up in the air. Laquandre White could potentially be an impact player for this football team when all is said and done. So I would say on the offensive side of the ball, he's a guy to look out for. On the defensive side of the ball, there aren't that many areas where there's even room for a guy to be a surprise, because they really brought everybody back. But I think Trill Williams is the name. He's a guy that could potentially become this team's cornerback 4 or 5. I think he could even potentially be in a role similar to Eric Rowe, where he can play a little bit of corner, he can play a little bit of safety. And I think, that's something to keep an eye on. I don't think that we should be shopping Eric Rowe, but if the play dictates it and an offer is made, if Brandon Jones on the defensive side of the ball continues to elevate his game and went from, I think it was something like 46% defensive snaps up to 60 some odd percent defensive snaps last year. If he continues to get better and phase out Eric Rowe, then you've got Eric Rowe on an expiring contract. And if you've got other guys that can fill in that role, then that might be an opportunity where you can either, make a trade, or maybe he's a cap casualty, because even though the Dolphins don't necessarily need to get under the cap, anything that they don't spend on cap space this year, they get to roll over towards next year, which could be extremely valuable, especially, depending on how the quarterback plays. So I just think that Trill Williams is a guy that could be a huge name. And then here's a name that wouldn't have been a surprise if it was mentioned the last 2 years, but at this point maybe becomes a surprise if we actually see high level play from him, and that's Noah Igbenogany. I'm not banking on that by any stretch, but it would sure be nice if Noah Igbenogany, if the light bulb could come on and he could just be serviceable. If he can be Nick Needham, I mean, the depth that puts in your secondary.
That's the thing, right? You don't need Noah Igbenogany to be Xavier Howard, right? And that was why one of the reasons that he was drafted originally was that at that point we were worried that Xavier Howard was dealing with all these injuries, and maybe we needed to find whoever the next elite corner was going to be. Well, Noah Igbenogany has not been that by any stretch of the imagination. But you don't need him to be that. You just need him to be okay. And he hasn't even been that, to be fair, at this point. But that leads me to yet again, like, you're just serving him up so beautifully tonight, Brain. It's like we haven't missed a beat here on this show. Who are some of the other guys from some of these previous draft classes who are maybe approaching their last chance on a rookie deal to really make a leap? Obviously, Igbenogany is the big one. Well, and obviously the quarterback too is another one, right? I mean, that's another one, but we're not going to have that conversation tonight. We got a long time, a lot of episodes coming up. I promise we're going to talk about the quarterback, not tonight. Okay. Because obviously, as we're going into training camp, that's not a question. I mean, you could say that, is there a question about Skylar Thompson beating out Teddy Bridgewater? But I would be stunned.
There's not a question.
I would be stunned if Teddy Bridgewater was not the backup quarterback when the regular season started. I mean, barring an injury, which would be catastrophic, I would be very surprised. And although I have heard the Miami Dolphins name mentioned with Jimmy Garoppolo, but I doubt very much that is a move the Dolphins are looking to make. Although maybe you trade Myles Gaskin for Jimmy G.
That's not happening.
No. Anyway, so who are those players? Who are some of those players that you're thinking about, Brain, that you like, it's time to make that jump if you're ever going to make it? Now's the year.
I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, we're all very excited about the players that were brought in last year and about the players that were brought in this year in free agency. So much so that it feels like this Dolphins team is on the precipice of becoming a legitimate contender. That's where we all hope that they can be, and we kind of feel like they're knocking on that door. It kind of remains to be seen, but that's kind of what we're all thinking. But the fact is that it's going to be very difficult for them to get there if they don't have those players from that draft that was considered the most important draft. I mean, you had 6 picks in the first 100 picks of the draft. If those picks do not turn into really good players, it's going to be difficult for this team to really make that jump, no matter how good the other pieces are, because those picks are really foundational picks for this team. And obviously Tua is the most important piece to that, but it goes beyond Tua, because Tua could still be an adequate starter in this league. And while that's not necessarily what you're looking for with the number 5 pick in the draft, it's still fine. But if your other 2 first-round picks are not even adequate starters, then that's horrendous. And then you take a look at the second-round picks, and it's like, I really like Raekwon Davis, but, I mean, he's a nose tackle. He's going to play in certain packages, And we don't know if this is going to be a base 3-4 team, if they're going to be more multiple. We don't know how much Raekwon Davis is going to play, and if Raekwon Davis is ever going to be like a Pro Bowl level talent. Brandon Jones, I think he's a nice player, but I don't think he's like a Pro Bowl caliber talent. Can Robert Hunt turn into that? I think Robert Hunt has when he came out, I thought he had a high ceiling at guard, and maybe this is the year that we really see that from Robert Hunt and not just flashes and then, kind of a high floor guy, but that's just kind of a pretty good starter. Because if you come out of it and you're like, the quarterback is okay, the offensive lineman sucks, the cornerback sucks, the safety is okay, you got yourself a nose tackle, and then you got a guard that's pretty good. Like, that's pretty terrible for 6 picks out of the top 100. And that's ultimately what would keep this team from taking the next step. Because if any one of those guys turns into a Pro Bowl caliber player, this is a playoff team without question. If any one of those guys.
I mean, that would be ideal. That would be ideal. And there is absolutely, and I think we can make no bones about it. We'll get into this when we get into Pulse Check a little bit later, but I think there is absolutely a world in which, if you're doing 100 simulations of this NFL season, there is absolutely a world where the Dolphins are making a deep run, if not making the Super Bowl. We saw it happen with the Cincinnati Bengals last year. A lot of things got to go right, but there is absolutely a world where that can happen. I'm not saying it will happen, but there is absolutely a world where it can happen. One of the things that would help that, Brain, you've got some questions about the linebacker position, particularly Channing Tindall, and how he can come in to whether or not he will supplant a Landon Roberts.
Yeah, and I think in the long run, he will. I think there's just way too much talent for him not to, but he's a little bit raw. But if he can come into training camp and just beat out a Landon Roberts from day one, he can take this defense to a whole other level. Because you can make the argument, when you look at this defensive line, you look at the addition of Melvin Ingram to the edge rushing, as an edge rusher, as a pass rusher. You are projecting further development from Jalen Phillips. Christian Wilkins really came into his own and now is in a contract year fighting for a contract extension. You've got depth there between, Raekwon Davis and, Emmanuel Ogbah and Brandon Seiler, and even a guy like Adam Butler and John Jenkins. Like, you've got depth on the defensive line, obviously at cornerback with X and Byron Jones. Obviously at safety where you're projecting further development of Javon Holland, who looked like an absolute stud the second half of the year. He's one of the best safeties in the league the second half of last season in his rookie year, coming off of a year where he didn't even play because he sat out his last year in college because of COVID. You brought back Nick Needham, if Channing Tindall comes back, like, this could be, you can make the argument that this is an elite defense, even if Channing Tindall isn't there. And you could certainly make the case that, all right, maybe Channing Tindall is like a sub-package player in his first year while he's kind of getting eased into things. You can make the case that they're still an elite defense. If he comes in and he actually beats out a Landon Roberts, and this guy's making splash plays, tackles for loss, impact plays, forcing fumbles, like, this defense takes the next step and becomes potentially generational. And like, I'm not saying they're there. I'm just saying the potential is there. There is enough talent on this team, between the young talent, the veteran talent, the guys that were drafted last year with Channing Tindall coming in. Like, there's enough talent, there's enough depth that this defense has the potential to be a really great, like a I don't want to say an all-time great, but the potential is there. It's like you want to say like a world exists where the Dolphins can make it to the Super Bowl, right? A world exists where this is an all-time great defense this year. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but the world exists.
I'm getting a little fired up over here, Brain. Getting a little fired up. You know what time it is, Brain? You know what I think? Because I'm starting to get fired up. I think it's time for a pulse check.
Let me check your pulse if you're not fired up.
That's right. It is time for the Dolphins Talk Pulse Check. This is a new segment that we're starting this season here at DolphinsTalk.com, where we want to hear from you, the fans. We're not going to hear from you, the fans, today, although please feel free to leave your answer in the comments. But yeah, we want you to send in videos. Tell us how you're feeling about the Miami Dolphins. Send an email to dtpulsecheck@gmail.com. Give us about 30 to 45 seconds telling us how you feel about the Miami Dolphins, and then sum it all up in one word. And that's what we are going to do right now. So, Brain, we've talked about some of these big questions that we have coming into training camp, and now it's time for us to check our pulses. So I'll start with you, Brain. It's time for your pulse check.
So the one word that comes to my mind is reminiscent. This team, the last few years, has been building to something. It's been building to a point where we're not really sure if they're a contender or, well, if they're even a playoff team or not. We know they're really not a contender, but now they're at a point where technically we still don't really know that they're like a playoff team because the AFC is so good, but it feels like they're knocking on the door of being a contender. And it's reminiscent of the majority of my childhood as a Miami Dolphins fan, which is thinking that there is a world that exists where the Miami Dolphins could be a Super Bowl team this year. And it's very exciting. But at the same time, year after year after year after year after year, in those years of watching the Miami Dolphins, I watched them disappoint and prove to really not be a contender. And while there is a world where the Dolphins can make it to the Super Bowl, there's also a very realistic world where the Dolphins don't even make the playoffs. And so it's very reminiscent because this is the first time, I would say, I don't know, maybe Saban's second year, when like there was all the excitement about them bringing in Dante Culpepper, even though that was a complete and utter disaster. So if you want to go back behind, further than that, this is probably the first time since the Jimmy Johnson and Dave Wannstedt eras where I think Dolphin fans are coming into the season with a very real excitement and almost expectation that this team is going to make a deep run and be a legitimate contender. But it's also very reminiscent of those teams who frankly disappointed. So it's just that's where I'm at. Reminiscent.
I think that's fair. Although I think you're also downplaying that year that Ryan Tannehill was coming back after they had made the playoffs and lost to the Steelers, and then Matt Moore was the quarterback, and there was a lot of excitement building before Tannehill went down with his second ACL injury there, and then they brought in Jay Cutler and nobody,
only delusional Dolphin fans thought that team was a contender.
But I'm just saying. Well, you're reminiscent. I got another word as well. And now for me, I was thinking about this because I was having the word that I want to use is two words, and that's against the rules. That's not how we do this, right? You got to use one word. You got to find one word. So I had to go to the internet and look up synonyms because I couldn't find a thesaurus. And then again, thesauruses typically don't give you synonyms for multiple words. They give you synonym for one word. So I found what I was looking for, and the term is buoyant. I am buoyant about the Miami Dolphins right now, which means that I'm cautiously optimistic, and that's what I had to look up synonyms for, because I'm feeling pretty good about this team. But at the same time, I've been, as you've said, we've been burned by this team so many times that I'm a little trepidatious. I'm being a little careful about how much I'm buying in and how much Kool-Aid I'm drinking. I'm certainly pretty excited. There are a lot of really great possibilities. And if everything breaks the right way, we are absolutely looking at a world where the Dolphins are making a deep run. Because remember this time last year, and even into like a month into the season, I'm remembering people talking about the Cincinnati Bengals and that team was a disaster because of that offensive line. Right. And then in spite of that offensive line, the Cincinnati Bengals went to the Super Bowl and had the ball with a chance to win the Super Bowl. Right. Obviously, they fell short, and it was because of the offensive line primarily, and also because the Rams defensive front was monstrous. And Aaron Donald is probably the greatest football player of all time. But still, there is a world where this Miami Dolphins team, even with their questionable offensive line, listen, there's a simulation that you could run. If you run 100 simulations, there's definitely going to be a simulation where the Miami Dolphins win the Super Bowl this year. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but there's a world where it can. And so, either way, it's there. We're looking at a situation where the chips could fall the right way and the Dolphins might have themselves a very successful season. There are obviously a lot of things that need to happen in order for that in order for that to work out. And there's also the possibility that, as buoyant as I am right now, a lot of air could be, I'm like a beach ball floating on the water. And as that air gets pulled out of the beach ball, I could start to sink, right? Maybe I will lose some of my buoyancy as the season goes on. But right now, I am feeling buoyant. And that is your Dolphins Talk Pulse Check. So, Brain, what we got? Anything from the people? We got any comments? Anybody sharing their words in the comments here? Somebody wrote Super Bowl as one word.
Kevin
Balanced.
says balanced.
I like
I don't
that.
know. I don't know exactly what he's getting. Is he saying like this is a balanced team? Is he saying I'm not too positive, I'm not too negative, I'm balanced?
Maybe he's having some eggs and toast and a glass of orange juice with his cereal. So he's got a well-balanced breakfast.
Yeah. That's
a possibility. He could mean that. Maybe it means that the Dolphins are balanced in that they're a team that is, they don't have, they certainly have areas where there are holes, but, there are worse teams in the National Football League, which is nice.
Well, that's setting the bar real high.
Listen, we go one step at a time on this show, baby. Old cynics like us. So anyway, that's how we're feeling. We're back, baby. We're back. We're going to be doing shows. We're thinking once a week from here until the season starts, and then we'll get into our twice a week schedule once the regular season gets going. Not quite sure yet just which day of the week we're going to be coming to you. That might be moving around. We might be changing that around. Sometimes we might come to you. It's a Thursday as we're broadcasting live tonight. So a lot of you are hearing this on Friday morning. We might do Wednesdays, we might do a Tuesday or Monday, who knows, maybe a Friday, maybe we do a weekend show, who knows. But we're going to be doing shows regularly now because we're getting back into your ear balls because the season is nearly upon us. And it's time to get back into the swing of things. So we invite you once again, if you're not doing so already, to make sure you're following us on Twitter at Amplified to Rock. That's me. He is at Aaron the Brain. The show is at SAME Old Dolphins. Make sure you are downloading, rating, reviewing, and subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, everywhere you get your podcasts. Make sure you're visiting DolphinsTalk.com each and every day for all the latest Miami Dolphins news and information. And make sure you've subscribed to the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. You don't want to miss a live show. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. A lot of good stuff coming your way on that channel. We've got a great interview with Thomas Morstead, the new punter for your Miami Dolphins. So you want to go check that out. And we got all kinds of other. We had Seth Levitt and OJ McDuffie on the podcast recently. So you make sure you're checking everything out over there at the YouTube, and you can see everybody's faces. And of course, if you like to just listen to podcasts in the more traditional way, we appreciate you as well. So, Brain, any last words you want to leave the people with before we next time we do this? Training camp will have begun.
I just want to try to say his name right one time in this episode. Zaquandre White.
Congratulations, you did.
Yeah, it was bugging me because I just couldn't say it correctly.
We should get. Well, see, this is the thing. I mean, we got to get you on the show. We got to get Mike. We got to get Mike. It took Mike like 3.5 years to learn how to say Gesicki. Right. All due respect to Mike, but it took him a long time to say Gesicki right. And there were still, I love the guys on this website, but there is still some, like Tom couldn't say Erica Izukama the other day. I can't even say it.
Was it Sealer or Seiler? I think it's Sealer. I think I said
Sealer.
Seiler earlier in this episode. So look, it's training camp for us.
It's training camp for everybody, right? We got 5 weeks to learn everybody's name, and you can't expect us to learn everybody's name because half of these guys aren't going to end up on the roster. You're going to feel really terrible if you learn how to pronounce Zaquandre White and then he doesn't make the team. Oh, Kevin says Gesicki's going to go off this year, and I hope you're right. But at the same time, I could also see a world where he goes off and demands a lot of money, and the Dolphins say, we're going to stick with Matt Damon. Hunter Long. We're going to stick with Hunter Long. We'll see. I would like to see Hunter Long. I mean, he's got a lot to prove this year. Big year for Hunter Long as well. Lots to talk about here as training camp goes on and gets started. So we're going to be here talking about it. And, we'll see how buoyant we are as training camp progresses and through the 3 preseason games that the Dolphins are going to play. But either way, I think you, like all of us, are very excited that football is just about back. So we're fired up. The Same Old Dolphin Show is back, and DolphinsTalk.com is the place to catch it every week between now and, forever, because we're not going away. We're not going away. But until next time, take care of yourselves and each other, and we will talk to you again next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Go Dolphins!
Talk about the Dolphins.